Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story, by Miriam C. Davis, narrated by Joe Barrett. Preface. One hot summer afternoon about 13 or so years ago, my brother Tim and I were sitting on my front porch drinking bracingly cold English cider. The conversation turned, as it always does on these occasions, to the subject of serial murder. Tim told me about a case he had read about as a boy, about a killer who went around New Orleans whacking Jewish bakers with an axe. Ever since I read Anne Rule's account of her erstwhile friend Ted Bundy, I have been fascinated, in a scared sort of way, with serial killers. I don't know what moved me to look into this further. I was deep into another topic at the time. Probably it was nothing more than the urge to procrastinate. But look into it I did, and found that the New Orleans case involved not Jewish bakers, but Italian grocers. Eventually I got hold of Robert Tallant's Ready to Hang, which formed the basis of most other accounts of the Axeman. Robert Tallant was a New Orleans writer of the mid-20th century, who, according to one reference librarian in the New Orleans Public Library, may well have gotten much of his information by hanging out in New Orleans bars. In a chapter titled The Axeman Wore Wings, Tallant tells the story. On the morning of May 24, 1918, Joseph and Catherine Maggio, Italian immigrants who ran a small grocery, were discovered dead and bloody in their bedroom. They'd been assaulted with their own axe and had had their throats cut. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. The assailant had gotten in by cutting out a panel in the back door. In the course of their investigation, police found a peculiar message written on the banquette, an old New Orleans term for sidewalk, near the Maggio's home and grocery. Mrs. Maggio is going to sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony. The police remembered that 7 years earlier, in 1911, 3 other Italian grocers had been murdered with an axe. In 2 cases, their wives had also been slain. Tallant gave the grocers' names as Crudi, Rossetti, and Tony Chiambra. Was Tony Chiambra's wife the Mrs. Tony of the sidewalk message? Tallant asked. Was this a message from the Italian mafia? Had the couple been slaughtered by gangsters for some unknown misdemeanor? No one was ever charged with the murders, so these questions were never satisfactorily answered. The next month, Louis Basumer, a Polish grocer, and Harriet Lowe, the woman who lived with him, were also attacked with an axe and seriously injured. Again, the weapon had been the grocer's own. Again, a door panel had been removed. And again, nothing was reported stolen. This time both victims survived, at least temporarily, and Lowe, who changed her story several times, accused Basumer first of being a German spy and later of having tried to kill her. When she died of her wounds 2 months later, Basumer was charged with murder. Over the next 14 months, the killer, nicknamed the Axeman by the press, racked up a litany of victims. Mrs. Edward Schneider, August 5, 1918, survived. Joseph Romano, August 10, 1918, died. Charles, Rosie, and Mary Cortamilia, March 10, 1919, Mary died. Steve Bolka, August 10, 1919, survived. Sarah Lauman, September 3, 1919, survived. And Mike Pepitone, August 27, 1919, died. In almost all cases, the modus operandi was the same. Back door panel cut out, the victim's own axe used, weapon abandoned at the scene, and nothing stolen. Most, but not all, of the victims were Italian grocers. Fear of the Axeman paralyzed the immigrant community. Some terrified Italians couldn't sleep at night without posting guards to stand watch. Phantom Axemen were seen everywhere. Stories circulated about grocers waking in the morning to find a door panel chiseled off and an axe outside their door. Louis Basumer was acquitted of Harriet Lowe's murder, but his was not the only trial. Rosie Cortamilia accused 2 neighbors, elderly grocer Iorlando Jordano and his son Frank, of having attacked them and having killed their 2-year-old daughter out of business rivalry. Even though her husband Charles testified that the killer had not been either man, father and son were convicted of murder, and 18-year-old Frank was sentenced to death. Later, Rosie admitted that she had lied because she hated the Jordanos. Shortly after the Cortamilia attack, the New Orleans Times-Picayune received a letter purporting to be from the murderer. He was a fell demon from the hottest hell, the letter claimed, and would descend on New Orleans the coming Tuesday night looking for a victim, sparing anyone listening to jazz. Talent reported that the designated evening, March 19th, was St. Joseph's night, and it was the loudest and most hilarious of any on record, as jazz blared all over the city. After the death of grocer Mike Pepitone in August 1919, the attacks finally stopped, and in Talent's account, the story seems to have had a dramatic and satisfactory sequel out in California. On December 7, 1920, Esther Pepitone, the widow of Mike Pepitone, shot and killed a New Orleans man named Joseph Mumphrey in Los Angeles. She told the police that Mumphrey was the Axeman, that she had seen him as he fled after murdering her husband. Convicted of his murder, Talent wrote, she served only 3 years before being freed. According to Ready to Hang, Joseph Mumphrey was a career criminal who was well known to the New Orleans police, and the dates he'd been in and out of prison matched the dates when the Axeman attacked and when he seemed to have disappeared. So was Mumphrey the Axeman? Talent said that the evidence was only circumstantial, and most New Orleanians believed that more than one killer was responsible. The two main theories were that the Mafia was responsible, or the killer was a homicidal maniac, a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type, as suggested by one of the investigating detectives. This was the story that I found on the web and in crime anthologies when I first began researching the Axeman case. Most of the available sources basically repeated Talent's version of events. While Talent left the question of the Axeman's identity open, I found that some writers seem to have swallowed whole the theory that Joseph Mumphrey was the killer. In a list of male serial killers, for instance, forensic psychologist Eric Hickey listed Joseph Mumphrey as the Axeman of New Orleans. In Bloodletters and Bad Men, crime writer J. Robert Nash argued that Mumphrey was a professional killer who used an axe to kill Pepitone and other victims as part of a mafia vendetta. Others, however, questioned aspects of Talent's account. In an early edition of his Hunting Humans, the Encyclopedia of Serial Killers, Volume 1, crime writer Michael Newton reported that city records showed that no Italian grocers named Crudi, Rossetti, or Sciambra had been killed by an axe or anything else in 1911. I had an opportunity to check out some of these questions in the early 2000s, soon after I became interested in the Axeman case. At the time, my husband and I visited New Orleans once or twice a year. On one of our visits, I popped out of the French Quarter to visit the city archives, located in the public library conveniently across Canal Street in the central business district. Examining homicide and coroner's records for 1911, I discovered that while no Crudi, Rossetti, or Sciambra had been murdered that year, a sleeping Italian grocer named Joseph Davi had been, his skull fractured and his wife cut up in the middle of the night. That such a basic fact about the case, and one so easily discoverable, had been missed suggested that the story had never really been properly investigated. Maybe, I thought, there's a book here. Since I began working on the Axeman of New Orleans, 2 well-done works on the subject have appeared, both times nearly giving me a heart attack. Kevin McQueen's chapter on the Axeman and the Axeman Came from Hell, and the account given by Gary Christ in Empire of Sin. If either narrative had been available when I first read about the Axeman, I might have never written this book. Both are useful, well-researched explorations of the Axeman's crimes. But both, I will argue, are incomplete. They don't answer questions that can, in fact, be answered. In the course of examining the tale of the Axeman, moreover, I became fascinated by the experience of the Italian, usually Sicilian, grocers he preyed on, particularly in the case of the Jordanos, the father and son accused by Rosie Cortemilia. The teenaged Frank and his elderly father, Iorlando, were as much casualties of the Axeman as any of his other victims. The story of Frank and his family merits telling because it illustrates the experience of Italian immigrants and the niche they carved out for themselves in the social hierarchy of early 20th century Louisiana, as well as the social prejudice against them. Mafia aficionados shouldn't worry. The story also involves the gangsters of the Sicilian underworld. What follows is the result of my own investigation into the Axeman of New Orleans murders, based on an examination of all available sources. This has been a different kind of history than I was trained to write in graduate school. I wanted to write something analytical that would be fully grounded in the sources, but would also appeal to a wide audience.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?